Hey there. Today we're diving into something pretty wild, an AI system that's being developed to help care for the elderly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's called Welzijn.AI,
Okay.
and it's being developed by researchers over at the Leiden University Medical Center in the Netherlands. So
Interesting.
you know those chatbots everyone's talking about these days?
Uh,
Well, imagine one that can actually pick up on signs of loneliness and maybe even spot some early hints of health issues just by talking to someone.
wow, really?
That's the idea behind Welzijn.AI.
That's fascinating because they're not just aiming to build another chatbot.
Right.
They're trying to create something that can genuinely understand and respond to the emotional needs of elderly individuals.
Yeah, so instead of just spitting out generic responses,
Mm-hmm.
this AI is actually trying to be more empathetic,
Yeah.
almost like a virtual companion.
Right.
Can a machine really provide that kind of emotional support?
That's a great
I'm
question.
a little skeptical, I'm not going to lie,
Yeah.
but I am really curious to see how they're approaching this.
Well, one of the ways they're trying to make these conversations more meaningful is by structuring them around those well-being questionnaires that you see at the doctor's office.
Uh-huh.
You know, the ones that ask about your mood and your activities and things like that.
Yeah,
All those things that contribute to your overall well-being.
right.
So it's the AI that's asking the questions,
Okay.
and it's using those answers to gain insights into how the person is really doing.
Okay, so it's not just random chit chat, it's
Yeah.
actually gathering data,
Exactly.
trying to make sense of it. That
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
But what really struck me
Yeah.
is that the elderly participants in this study
Mm-hmm.
specifically said they wanted an AI that could understand and respond to their emotions.
That's incredible.
They wanted it to be empathetic.
Wow.
I mean, that's a huge insight.
It is.
And it really challenges the way we traditionally think about AI. You know, we're so used to seeing it as this cold, calculating force.
Right.
But what if it could actually develop emotional intelligence?
That would be amazing.
That's where it starts to feel like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
You know?
Like sci-fi.
Yeah, we've all seen those films where robots become self-aware and start to feel emotions.
Right.
But in this case,
Yeah.
it's more about programming the AI to recognize and respond appropriately to human emotion.
Exactly. That's the goal.
So they're using cutting-edge AI
Mhm.
to try to simulate human empathy.
Mm-hmm.
But how does it actually work in practice?
Well,
How can you teach a machine to understand something as complex as human emotion?
that's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And to be honest, it's still really early days.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about Welzijn.AI is that they're using a combination of speech recognition
Okay.
and this really cool open source language model called Gate.
Gaichi.
Yeah.
That's a funny name.
It is. It's Dutch.
Okay.
It's a Dutch LLM.
Okay.
And what sets it apart is that it's designed to be both powerful and transparent.
Oh, okay.
The developers wanted to make sure that the system wasn't a mysterious black box making decisions that nobody could understand.
That's really important. So you can actually see how the AI is processing information,
Right.
coming up with its responses.
Exactly.
That's got to be reassuring for users, especially they're sharing personal information,
Absolutely.
feelings, things like that,
Transparency is key when you're dealing with sensitive data.
especially in healthcare.
Exactly. And it seems like the developers are really committed to building a system that is both effective and ethical.
Well, speaking of ethics, that's a whole other can of worms, right?
It is.
I mean, what happens if this AI starts picking up on signs of depression or anxiety?
Yeah,
Who is responsible for intervening?
it's a big question.
And what about data privacy?
Right.
There are so many potential pitfalls here.
You're right. There are a lot of ethical considerations to grapple with, and that's
Mhm.
something we'll definitely delve deeper into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll explore how the developers are trying to mitigate those risks and ensure that the technology is used responsibly.
Yeah.
But before we get there,
Right.
I think it's important to understand how this system was designed
Yeah.
and why certain choices were made.
All right, let's do it.
Okay.
Take me back to the drawing board.
Okay,
How
so
did this whole thing come about?
it all started with a group of researchers at the Leiden University Medical Center
Okay.
who were looking for new ways to support the growing population of elderly individuals.
And they landed on AI as the solution.
They did.
That's a bold move.
It is, but it also makes a lot of sense when you think about the challenges of elder care.
Mhm.
Loneliness is a huge issue.
Yeah.
And so is access to quality care.
Especially for people who might be living alone
Exactly.
or have limited mobility.
Mm-hmm.
So they saw AI as a way to kind of bridge that gap,
Yeah.
to provide companionship
Uh-huh.
and potentially even some level of care.
Right.
But I'm guessing they didn't just jump in head first and start building a robot therapist?
No, not quite. They took a very methodical approach
Okay.
involving various stakeholders right from the start.
Uh-huh.
They actually conducted 3 different evaluations to gather feedback and make sure they were on the right track.
Okay.
The first one was a SWOT analysis.
A SWOT analysis.
Yeah.
Okay, remind me what that is.
It stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Oh, right, right.
So they got a bunch of experts together to brainstorm all of those things.
Okay, so they brought in the big guns.
They did.
Doctors, psychologists,
Mm-hmm.
even the Dutch Patient Federation.
Exactly.
What kind of insights did they glean from that?
Well, the experts saw a lot of potential for AI to improve the quality of life for elderly individuals.
Like how?
Well, imagine an AI that could not only provide companionship,
Yeah.
but also remind someone to take their medication,
Okay.
alert a caregiver if there's a change in routine,
Uh-huh.
or even just offer a friendly voice to chat with on a lonely afternoon.
So that's a lot more than just a chatbot.
It is.
It's almost like a virtual assistant specifically designed for elderly care.
Exactly.
But were there any concerns raised during that brainstorming session?
Of course, no technology is without its risks,
Right.
and AI is no exception.
Yeah.
One of the biggest concerns was the potential for dependence.
Dependence, okay.
What if people become so reliant on the AI that they start to neglect their human relationships?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
It's like anything else. Too much of a good thing can be bad.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of data privacy.
Oh, of course.
These conversations are incredibly personal.
Yeah.
And it's crucial that the information is handled responsibly and securely.
Yeah, I can't imagine anyone wanting their private conversations with a robot therapist to be leaked online.
Right. Nobody wants that.
So data security was a major concern,
It was.
as was the question of who should have access to this information. Should it be shared with doctors,
Yeah.
family members, caregivers?
Right. These are all tricky ethical dilemmas that the researchers had to consider.
Yeah, it sounds like they had their work cut out for them.
They did.
But that was just the first evaluation, right?
Exactly. They also had a co-creation session where they brought in informal caregivers,
Okay.
a geriatric specialist,
Okay.
and a computer scientist representing the development team.
All right, so a good mix.
Yeah, they wanted to get a sense of what features were most important from different perspectives.
So they were trying to figure out what the ideal AI companion would look like.
Exactly.
From the user's point of view, as well as from a technical and medical standpoint.
Precisely.
And what's fascinating is that there were some interesting disagreements between the different groups.
There were.
Really?
Yeah, for example, the informal caregivers really pushed for features that would give the elderly user maximum autonomy.
Like what kind of features are we talking about?
Things like an easily accessible on-off button,
Okay.
the ability to control who has access to their data, and a clear understanding of how the system works.
I could see why they'd be concerned about that.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to feel like they're being monitored without their consent.
Right, exactly.
But the computer scientist, while acknowledging the importance of user control, was also concerned about potential misuse. Okay, I see the dilemma.
Yeah.
So it's a balancing act.
It is.
You want to give users control over their data and their experience.
Right.
But you also want to make sure the system is being used responsibly and effectively.
Exactly. It's one of those classic ethical dilemmas that comes up again and again when we're talking about AI in healthcare.
And then there was the third evaluation.
Yes.
The one where they actually talked to the elderly users themselves.
Exactly. And that's where things got really interesting.
Okay, so let's hear it.
We'll dive into those user evaluations in the next part of our deep dive.
Ooh, sounds like we're about to uncover some juicy insights.
We are.
I can't wait to hear what the users had to say. All right, so we've talked about the researchers' hopes for Welzijn.AI and what the experts thought about it, the good and the bad. But let's get down to brass tacks. What did the elderly users themselves actually think of this whole AI companion idea?
Well, that's where that third evaluation comes in. They actually showed a mock-up of the Welzijn.AI interface to a group of 20 elderly folks and asked them for their honest feedback.
So they went straight to the source. That's great. Were these older folks comfortable with the whole technology aspect? Any surprising reactions?
There were some surprises for sure. First off, they mostly had positive things to say about accessibility and trusting the system.
Oh, okay.
They thought it seemed easy to use, and they believed that their information would be kept private.
So no technophobia holding them back?
Not really, no.
That's a good sign. But you mentioned before that there were some negative feelings about how easy it was to understand their overall satisfaction.
Yeah. While they liked the general idea, some of the participants found the interface kind of confusing. Yeah, they weren't sure how to navigate it or what some of the icons meant.
Okay.
Remember, this was just a static mock-up, not a fully functional system, so that could explain some of the confusion.
Yeah, it sounds like some user-friendly tweaks to the design would probably go a long way.
Yeah, definitely.
What about the satisfaction part? What were they unhappy with?
Well, even though they understood that they were interacting with AI, they still wanted it to feel more human, more engaging, and more capable of understanding their emotions.
Wait, hold on. So they wanted a machine that could understand their feelings.
Yeah.
Isn't that asking a bit much?
You'd think so, but remember those large language models the developers are using? They are really sophisticated.
Yeah.
And the elderly participants in the study were crystal clear that they wanted empathy in an AI companion. It was actually their top priority.
Wow, so they weren't just looking for a digital assistant to schedule appointments or remind them to take their meds. They wanted something deeper, something that could really offer emotional support and genuine companionship.
That's exactly right.
That brings up one of the most fascinating and kind of unsettling aspects of this whole project.
Yeah.
Can we actually create AI that's truly capable of empathy? And if we can, what are the ethical implications of that?
It's definitely mind-blowing when you really think about it. We're talking about creating machines that can actually understand and respond to our deepest emotions.
It's like stepping into the realm of science fiction.
It really is, but it's becoming more and more real, and that's why the developers of Welzijn.AI were so careful to involve all of those stakeholders, the experts, the caregivers, and especially the elderly users themselves.
It sounds like they were really trying to understand the technology from all sides and how it could potentially impact people. So let's go back to those expert opinions for a minute. What were some of the strengths they identified, besides the potential for companionship?
Well, one of the biggest strengths they saw was the potential for catching and addressing mental health issues early on. By analyzing language patterns and how people answer those well-being questions, Welzijn.AI might be able to pick up on subtle clues that a human could miss.
So it could be like having a virtual therapist constantly monitoring your well-being, even if you're not actively seeking help.
That's the idea.
That could be huge for preventing those problems from getting worse. But couldn't that also feel kind of intrusive?
That's one of the ethical dilemmas we have to think about. Where is the line between helpful monitoring and invading someone's privacy? It's a tough balance. And it gets even more complicated when you think about the role of caregivers.
Right, because if this AI is noticing potential problems, who does it tell? And how do we make sure that information is used responsibly?
You got it. The experts thought Welzijn.AI could be a way to give informal caregivers, like family or friends, more information about their loved one's well-being.
So it could be like having an extra pair of eyes and ears, but with the added benefit of AI analysis. That could be really helpful, especially for caregivers who might be feeling overwhelmed or not sure how to best help their loved one.
Yeah, and it could help ease some of the pressure on professional caregivers, which is a major problem in our aging society.
Hmm.
But again, those ethical considerations pop up. Who gets to decide what information is shared with caregivers? And what about the older person's right to privacy?
It seems like every potential benefit comes with a potential risk.
That's the thing about any new technology, especially something as powerful and potentially disruptive as AI. It's our job to talk about these things, to really consider the positives and negatives, and to make sure that we're developing and using this technology in a way that's both helpful and ethical.
Absolutely. So we've looked at the user feedback, what the experts think, and the ethical things to think about. But there's one more piece we need to fit in. Let me get back to that co-creation session where they were trying to figure out the perfect features for this AI companion. What were some of the big takeaways from that discussion? So let's unpack those co-creation sessions a bit.
Okay.
You mentioned some interesting disagreements.
Yeah.
Where was the friction coming from?
Well, you had this mix of people, right? You
Mm.
had the informal caregivers,
Okay.
often family members.
Right.
You had the geriatric specialist who's really focused on the medical needs.
Yep.
And then you had the computer scientist who's the one actually building Welzijn.AI.
Okay, so they each came to the table with totally different priorities.
They did totally different perspectives.
Like my family would be worried about my grandma feeling like she's being spied on.
Yeah.
And her doctor wants to make sure she's taking her pills every day.
Exactly.
Totally different.
Different viewpoints.
Yeah.
And the caregivers were really focused on features that gave the elderly user as much autonomy as possible.
So like what kind of stuff are we talking about?
Like a really obvious off button,
Okay.
Something that's easy to find and easy to use.
Uh-huh.
They wanted it to be super clear what data is being collected and who has access to it.
Yeah.
They wanted the user to feel like they were in control, not like they were constantly being monitored.
I can see why they'd be concerned about that.
Yeah, nobody wants their grandma to feel like she's living in some dystopian sci-fi novel, right?
No, exactly.
But the developer pushed back a little bit on that.
Really?
Yeah, not because he didn't value the user's autonomy,
Mm-hmm.
but because he was thinking about what could go wrong.
Okay.
What if somebody turns the system off specifically to hide a health problem?
Yeah, that's smart.
Or what if they prevent their family from seeing information that could actually help them?
So too much control in the user's hands could actually backfire in some cases.
Exactly.
So it's a balancing act.
It is a tough one.
Did they find any sort of common ground?
You know what? They did.
Oh, really?
Despite all those different opinions, everybody agreed on one thing. They absolutely had to have top-notch data security.
Okay, that's reassuring.
No matter what features they built, they all knew that that sensitive information had to be protected.
It sounds like they're really thinking through all the angles.
They're trying to balance all those competing priorities.
But at the end of the day, does it actually work?
That's the big question.
Were the elderly users happy with what they saw?
Well, the answer is a kind of a mixed bag.
Oh, okay.
Remember those user evaluations we talked about?
Mhm.
They generally liked the idea,
Yeah.
especially the potential for companionship,
Right.
but the interface itself wasn't quite there yet.
So it was too complicated for seniors who maybe aren't as comfortable with technology?
Not necessarily too complicated,
Okay.
but some of them found it confusing.
Like what?
Like icons that weren't clear,
Okay.
navigation that was a little bit difficult.
So like usability issues.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
And, those are things that can be fixed,
Mhm.
but it just highlights how important it is to make this technology user-friendly, especially for an older audience.
It makes you wonder, even if you've got this super advanced AI, if it's a pain to use, people are just going to give up on it.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it goes beyond just buttons and menus.
Right.
They really wanted that empathy that we talked about.
They did.
And some of them felt like the mock-up wasn't really delivering on that.
Yeah, they wanted something that felt more personal,
Uh,
more responsive, less robotic.
that's a tough ask. Can you really program personality into something like this?
That's what the researchers are trying to figure out right now,
Hmm.
and it's one of the most exciting parts of this whole project.
But they're
Looking at different ways to make the AI feel more empathetic, more like a real companion.
So it's not just about crunching data and spitting out insights.
No.
It's about creating an experience that actually feels supportive,
Exactly.
maybe even a little bit human.
That's the goal.
Wow, it's pretty amazing that we're even at this point, AI that can potentially understand our feelings, respond to them. Feels like science fiction.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
But it also brings up a ton of questions and challenges.
Definitely. We've only just scratched the surface of what AI can do, especially in healthcare.
Yeah.
And as this technology keeps developing, we have to keep having these conversations about the ethics of it, about data privacy, about what it really means to care for someone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Welzijn.AI might be just one example, but it's a powerful reminder of what this technology can do, both the good and the bad. This has been a deep dive in the truest sense of the word. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep exploring.